Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Judas Priest's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and why I feel like this was not handled properly by the Hall of Fame and why I feel Judas Priest is not getting the respect that they deserve and why heavy metal in general doesn't get the respect that it deserves from the Hall of Fame. I wasn't planning on making a video on this topic because I find this whole Hall of Fame thing to just be upsetting and boorish, and I try not to think about it. But heavy metal author and journalist Martin Popoff, who's been here a bunch of times at Delaire, who's someone who I really respect, he wrote an excellent article for Goldmine magazine. It's online, an online article discussing this whole thing and why he feels like Judas Priest deserves more respect, and this should have been handled differently. I will be leaving a link to Martin's excellent article in the description down below, so I highly encourage you to read this article because it's great. I did speak briefly with Martin, and he mentioned that he's going to be on Sea of Tranquility with Pete Pardo discussing this topic, so I also encourage you to seek out that video when it comes out to, I'm sure, hear a lot of great insights from Martin and from Pete. I know I'm going to be looking forward to that video. I'm also going to be quoting and linking from an article that Loudwire put out, sort of explaining some of the stuff that's going on here with this award and why it just doesn't feel right, and why, again, it wasn't handled properly. So I'll also leave a link to that Loudwire article in the description down below. Okay, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right. I've made a video on this topic of the Hall of Fame before, and man, oh man, do they do this thing more than once a year? Because it seems like every time I turn around, they're having these award ceremonies, and my Facebook feed is blowing up with people getting angry and upset. I'm not going to go super in-depth on my feelings on the Hall of Fame. I'll leave a link to the description to this previous video that I made so you can check that out. But basically, to summarize, I view the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a clueless corporation that just really doesned understand. I view them like the Hard Rock Cafe, for instance, which, if anybody who doesn't know, is a restaurant, a rock-themed restaurant. And when I walk into the Hard Rock Cafe, I just understand that their main objective is to sell hamburgers and drinks. So all the stuff on the walls is just what, in their mind, they interpret as being hard rock. So you're going to get pictures of John Lennon and his New York shirt. You're going to get pictures of Bob Marley. You're going to get some rap artists. And yeah, you're going to get some rock things, and you're going to get some cool stuff. But basically, I don't get upset. I don't walk in there and wonder why there isn't more heavy metal, because I understand it's just they're a clueless corporation. Their main objective is to sell cheese fries and stuff like that. And the stuff on the walls is just to try to get you to go in there and buy a t-shirt from them. Yeah, I view the Hall of Fame also like, some relative that I run into every so many years at a family wedding that is trying to convince me that Nickelback is a great heavy metal band. I just sort of smile and go, yeah, whatever, and politely walk away. Well, that's kind of the way I view the Hall of Fame. I just sort of go, yeah, whatever, and walk away from it. I don't like to invest a whole lot of emotional energy in them. But hey, this one hits close to home. It's Judas Priest, right? They're one of my favorite bands, in my opinion, one of the most influential bands in heavy metal. And they've been eligible for the Hall of Fame now for, I don't know, since like the 2000s or the 90s. I forget what the criteria is. You have to have been have a career of like 20 or 25 years or something. So they've been eligible for quite a long time. They've been snubbed and held out for quite some time. And heavy metal in general, seems to take a back seat. It seems to be an afterthought to whoever these people are who make these decisions. I have no idea who is behind this, but all right. But when it comes to Judas Priest here, it gets personal, and you say, all right, well, why they're getting inducted. Who cares? What's the big deal? What are what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the way they're getting inducted. First of all, they didn't initially make it into the ballot. If you remember, there was like there was a voting process or something, and they didn't even make that cut. But then they were sort of brought in through this other under this other category called musical excellence. Now, musical excellence is described as an award that's given to artists, musicians, songwriters, and producers whose originality and influence creating music have had a dramatic impact on music. Okay, that sounds all nice and everything. What's the problem, right? Well, I'm going to quote from Loudwire here because I think they say this pretty well, describing what the problem is. And Loudwire describes this as actually a backhanded compliment and a byproduct of a system of checks and balances for the seriously out of touch and backward ideological thinking of the Hall's Standards Voting Committee. Okay, so what they're saying by that is that most of the other metal artists that have gotten inducted, like Black Sabbath, for instance, they have gone in under the Performers Award. And the Performers Award is for artists who have created music whose originality, impact, and influence has changed the course of rock and roll. Now, if that doesn't describe Judas Priest, what does, right? It seems like they should perfectly be into they should fall into this, they should fall into that category of a Performers Award. And because they're not getting the Performers Award, they're not going to sort of get the same pomp and circumstance and ceremony that some of these other bands like Black Sabbath and Metallica and other bands that have gotten the performers category. That's sort of, I think, put out there as more of the more prestigious of the categories. So Loudwire goes on to say here, I'm quoting from the Loudwire article, that Judas Priest will be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when all is said and done, but without the fanfare previously enjoyed by Black Sabbath, Kiss, Deep Purple, Metallica, and Guns N' Roses. The Judas Priest name can easily be mentioned in the same breath as all of those acts, not at all feeling like an outlier, but the Hall just doesn't give a darn. And they don't use the word darn, they curse, but I like to keep this family friendly. And an editor's note, it took them forever to put some of these other bands in there, for like Deep Purple. So that's the issue here, that Priest is sort of getting this, it feels like a consolation prize. It's sort of a backhanded like thing, like, okay, we'll just give this to you as a way to just get people off our backs from the metal world. And again, it just feels like, heavy metal, it just gets this, it's like it's a second-class citizen or something. And like I've mentioned in my original video on the Hall of Fame, in some ways, I'm okay with that. These people are clueless. They don't understand. We understand. We're the fans. We know how important heavy metal is. We know how important Judas Priest is. If these corporate people can't understand this, who cares? Heavy metal has always been an outlier. It's always, stood on the fringes and everything like that. And for me, that is what makes heavy metal special and all the more important to me. And it's what makes bands like Judas Priest that much more important to me, because if you're a person on the inside, you know how important Judas Priest is. I don't need to explain to anybody here at my channel how important Judas Priest is to heavy metal. We all know. And if these people don't understand, and if they don't understand it by now, they're never going to get it. Forget about them. But okay, at least they're getting inducted, I guess, and their name will be in there when people visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't know how this works. I've never been to the place. I guess their name will be on a plaque somewhere. Maybe there'll be a picture or something. I have no idea. I guess that's a good thing. Judas Priest seems to be happy about it. Wonderful, but it just can't help. You just can't help feeling like that they're not getting the full respect and recognition that they deserve. All right, So Martin wrote an excellent article for Goldmine magazine online that I think sums up all the reasons why Judas Priest, deserves the whole red carpet treatment and deserves to get, the full respect that is coming to them. Okay, so I'm going to read some quotes here from Mark because I think that he just summarizes this really well, and all the reasons here why Priest should get, the full treatment here from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So this is from Martin's article. Martin says, Judas Priest started in 1969 and they're still going. That makes them a band that is 48 years old. In terms of influence, you'd be hard-pressed to find a general heavy metal band from 1980 forward or any thrash or power metal band whatsoever that wouldn't cite Judas Priest as one of their top influences, if not the top. It's also pretty much consensus, and certainly this writer's viewpoint, that no one record throughout the entire 1970s, other than the originals, the first Black Sabbath self-titled album and Deep Purple in Rock, did more to advance the integrity of heavy metal than 1976 Sad Wings of Destiny. I couldn't agree with Martin anymore. When you're talking about the pillars, the historical moments in heavy metal, when you're drawing out a timeline, when you're dissecting the DNA and trying to figure out when things were birthed, when the atoms, the planets exploded and created the universe. Well, for me, it's like Martin said here, 1970, the first Black Sabbath album, In Rock, I'd throw in, and I know Martin would also, very, very heavy, very humble for the first Uriah Heep album, and 1976 Sad Wings of Destiny. I'll take it one step further and say that I truly believe that Stained Class is the first pure, unfiltered, purest in form heavy metal album to land. Stained Class for me is just pure metal, and it's when all the experimenting of what everybody else was doing at that point, all those chemicals came together, the beaker exploded, and we just had this pure, shiny piece of metal that is the Stained Class album. So I absolutely agree with Martin here. They've been around since 1969. They were extremely important to the development of heavy metal, the sound of heavy metal. Sad Wings of Destiny, I'd throw in Stained Class in there also. Okay, Martin also mentions, it should also be mentioned too, the award that they're getting as a, what is the word here? I'm jumping around in my musical excellence. That award has not typically been given to bands. It tends to land on individuals. For instance, last year they gave it to Randy Rhoads, which makes total sense because Randy, himself as a musician changed the way the guitar played and everything. So the Musical Excellence Award feels like something that's more appropriate for an individual. And it should be given to somebody like Rob Halford, for instance, should get a Musical Excellence Award for the way that he has changed the way heavy metal singers are, the way he defined, in a lot of ways, heavy metal singing. Okay, so Martin does go on to mention the lead playing of KK and Glenn, how important that is to the development of heavy metal, and also Rob's genre-defining, groundbreaking voice. Martin mentions how they've had hit songs. You've Got Another Thing Coming, Living After Midnight, Breaking the Law, Turbo Lover. They had songs that crossed over into the mainstream. You hear You Got Another Thing Coming and Living After Midnight on classic rock radio stations. You hear it get played at football games and hockey games and stuff, so they've crossed over into sort of the mainstream conscience. Martin also mentions, I totally agree, they've had multiple gold and platinum records. They've been a big concert draw since the 80s, maybe, minus the 90s there. There was a sort of a down period then in the 90s. All right, and then Martin sort of goes up to summarize this here, and I wanted to read this. So this is quoted from Martin. He says, Judas Priest are also widely accepted as the first big band that made no apologies for being heavy metal, beginning with anthems such as Take on the World and United back at the beginning of the 80s, with an uncompromising leather and studs and motorcycles and whips and handcuffs image to match. Call it camp, inconsequential, whatever, but it's a uniform that had been widely adopted by hundreds of bands through the 80s, as well as the European power metal resurgence of the mid-90s that continues to this day. I couldn't have said it any better, especially this first part where he mentions them as being the first big band that made no apologies for being heavy metal. Yes, thank you for saying that, Martin, because I absolutely agree with this. Judas Priest was the first band, Deep Purple. I made a video on bands that I consider to be hard rock and not heavy metal. Not going to get into that here. Check out that old video. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. But I mentioned how Deep Purple and Uriah Heep, they didn't really, Led Zeppelin, they didn't consider themselves to be heavy metal. Yes, they influenced heavy metal, but they themselves did not consider themselves to be heavy metal. Even Black Sabbath didn't really call themselves heavy metal. Black Sabbath was coming from a blues and a jazz influence, and yes, they are very important to heavy metal, and I do consider Black Sabbath to be a heavy metal band. But for me, Judas Priest was the first band to fully embrace that, to embrace it in sound, to embrace it in album covers, and like Martin says here, to embrace it in image. And that's why, to me, they are so very, very important. They are really the first person to sort of plant the flag for heavy metal on the moon, in my opinion. And for that, and for all these other reasons that Martin's mentioned and that I mentioned, I really think that they should have been given the full-blown red carpet VIP treatment here at the Hall of Fame. They are as worthy in the heavy metal Hall of Fame archives, to stand there next to Black Sabbath or really any other band. They, in my opinion, are just as important. So Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I'm glad Judas Priest is happy that they're getting in there. I'm glad, I guess, that they did get in there. But Martin mentions, and I sort of agree with this, that maybe they should respectfully decline this award and wait till they're giving the full recognition that they deserve. In fact, I think that when bands like, I don't know the timeline here. I don't know if Metallica was inducted before Black Sabbath or whatever, but I think some of these bands, like for instance Metallica, maybe should have made a stand and said, you know what, we're not going in until Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and Iron Maiden, and Motorhead, and all these other essential bands are in here before them, because Metallica would no doubt not deny how important those bands were to their formation. So, all right, there you go. That's my rant. My rant's over. Make sure you check out Martin's excellent article there. I'll leave the link in the description. Check out the Loudwire article for some more in-depth discussion of what some of this terminology and everything means with this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, musical excellence, and all these other terms and everything. All right, there you go. Let me know what you guys think about this in the description down below. And until we see you again, I don't need to tell you guys, let's stay heavy, stay metal.